The story of Béziers does not begin with the clash of armies. It begins with tension that stretched across decades and with the simmering fear that settled deep into the political and religious heart of medieval Europe. When the violence finally erupted in 1209, it did not unfold as an ordinary siege or a battle between rival soldiers. It became something far more disturbing. What happened at Béziers was not only slaughter, it was the deliberate erasure of a community carried out under the banner of righteous cause by men convinced that destroying a city could be an act of faith. To understand why the town became the target of the first major assault in the Albigensian Crusade, one must understand the world into which Béziers was born. The south of France was a place where cultures mingled and where the ideas of the Cathars took root. The Cathars believed in a spiritual dualism that challenged the authority of the Catholic Church. To the papal court in Rome, these beliefs were not simply misguided, they were threats that struck at the foundations of control. Heresy in the Middle Ages was treated not as a theological disagreement, but as a political crime. It threatened the unity of Christendom and the authority of the Church itself. Béziers, a prosperous town in the Languedoc region, became known for harboring Cathars. Yet, what is often overlooked is that its population was mixed. Many of its residents were loyal Catholics. But in the logic of Crusade, nuance did not matter. In the eyes of the Church and the northern French barons who led the campaign, the entire region had become suspect. Pope Innocent III called for a crusade against the heretics of the south, promising spiritual reward for those who took up arms. Land hunger, political rivalry, and religious zeal mixed into a volatile force that would soon descend upon Béziers. By July of 1209, the Crusader army under the command of the papal legate Arnaud Amaury reached the town. Contemporary estimates differ widely, but the number of armed crusaders likely exceeded 10,000, with additional camp followers and mercenaries swelling the ranks. The people of Béziers were unprepared for such a force. Their walls were strong, but their unity was not. The town was home to Catholics and Cathars alike, and the arrival of the Crusaders placed them all under the same shadow of suspicion. Negotiations began not for peace, but for division. Amaury demanded that the townspeople hand over the Cathars within the walls. This meant neighbors were expected to denounce neighbors. Families were expected to betray their own. The leaders of Béziers refused, whether out of solidarity or simply unwillingness to surrender their own people remains unknown. The sources show no moment of heroic defiance or dramatic speech, only silence. Their answer sealed their fate. On the morning of July 22nd, Crusader forces surrounded Béziers. The siege should have lasted days or weeks. Instead, events inside the walls set off a chain of chaos that would become infamous across the medieval world. According to chroniclers, a skirmish between the Crusaders and a group of defenders turned unexpectedly. A band of local men, perhaps overconfident, surged out through one of the gates. The Crusaders pushed back and momentum shifted. The gate was left insufficiently defended. A wave of attackers seized the opportunity. In moments, they reached the entrance and forced their way inside. A city that should have endured a long siege fell in a single rush. Once inside, the Crusaders no longer saw opponents. They saw heretics and believed that judgment had come. Accounts from the time diverge in their detail, but they agree on one thing. The violence that followed was indiscriminate. Men, women, and children were cut down without pause. Churches that should have been sanctuaries became the final places of desperation. The Cathedral of Saint-Nazaire filled with townspeople, hoping that sacred walls might offer protection. They did not. Many of those who fled into the church died there. It is during these moments that one of the most chilling statements in medieval history was recorded. Caesarius of Heisterbach, a monk, writing years later, attributed to Arnaud Amaury the now famous sentence. When questioned about how to distinguish Catholics from Cathars, he is said to have replied that God would know his own. The phrase became a symbol of merciless destruction. Whether Amaury truly spoke the words or they emerged later as a literary reflection of the horror, the meaning remains the same. The Crusaders killed without hesitation because they believed judgment was divine, not human. The slaughter spread through every district of Béziers. Chroniclers struggled to describe the chaos. Some wrote of thousands killed, others pushed the figure to 20,000. Medieval numbers are often embroidered or exaggerated. What matters more than the exact count is that Béziers was effectively depopulated in a single day. The Crusaders came seeking heretics, but the bodies left in the streets belonged to believers and non-believers alike. Children died alongside their parents. Elderly citizens died trying to flee. Even priests attempting to shield their congregations were not spared. Fire consumed what blades did not. Houses were torched, and the flames leapt from roof to roof until entire quarters collapsed. The smell of smoke and the stench of death settled together in the summer air. Those who did escape carried stories that spread across the region, creating fear that would shape the fate of the Languedoc long after the smoke cleared. Why Béziers suffered so completely is a question historians continue to examine. Some argue that the Crusaders were enraged by the town's refusal to hand over suspected heretics. Others see the massacre as a calculated demonstration designed to break resistance across the south. It is possible that both motives aligned. By destroying Béziers, the Crusaders sent a message to all towns that defiance would not be tolerated. The horror of that day was not an accident of war, but a tool of conquest. After the violence ended, there was no rebuilding. The Crusaders did not occupy Béziers or establish a new order within its walls. They left it smoking. This detail reveals the depth of devastation. A city meant nothing if its people were gone. Béziers had ceased to exist not only as a place but as a community. Its destruction became a warning carved into the landscape. The survivors carried trauma that cannot be easily conveyed. Refugees fled to nearby settlements, sometimes bringing with them wounded children or charred scraps of belongings. They found little comfort. The Crusader army continued its advance, and other towns soon faced similar choices and similar suffering. Carcassonne surrendered days later, but even surrender did not guarantee protection. The wider Albigensian Crusade would continue for decades, leaving behind a legacy of displacement, fear, and cultural loss. The church chroniclers presented the fall of Béziers as a triumph. Heresy had been punished. Divine will had been fulfilled. Yet even among medieval writers, one finds a flicker of discomfort. The scale of the killing disturbed some who recorded the event. They described the massacre, but their language faltered when trying to justify the death of thousands who held no Cathar beliefs. Béziers forced medieval Europe to confront a truth its leaders often avoided. Violence carried out in the name of faith could become something else entirely. It could become destruction for its own sake. Archaeology has little to say about Béziers in 1209 because so little was left intact. Unlike battles where mass graves remain to tell the story of the fallen, Béziers offers more silence than evidence. Silence becomes its own kind of record. It reminds us that entire populations can vanish without leaving behind bones arranged in neat lines. In some cases, history preserves absence more clearly than presence. Later generations tried to reclaim the memory of Béziers, but the trauma of its destruction shaped local identity for centuries. Even when the town was rebuilt, it stood on the ghosts of an older place. The massacre did not fade into myth or legend. It remained a grim reminder of the consequences of ideological warfare in an age when power, faith, and ambition mixed in ways that made cruelty seem righteous. When modern historians look back at Béziers, they see more than a medieval atrocity. They see a moment when the logic of crusade matched the logic of absolute violence, when the need to purge heresy overrode the value of human life, when a city became an example to frighten others into obedience, and when faith mingled with politics to devastating effect. The horror of Béziers is not found only in its scale, it lies in the way ordinary people were caught in forces far larger than themselves, and how their deaths became a message rather than a tragedy. Entire families vanished from record, names disappeared, daily routines that once defined life in the narrow streets of the town ended without closure. No chronicler listed the sorrow carried by the survivors who walked away from ruins that had once been their homes. The massacre offers a lens through which one can see the extremes of medieval belief and the consequences of dehumanizing an enemy. By declaring an entire population suspect, the Crusaders removed the boundaries that ordinarily constrained violence. Béziers became a proof of what could happen when a city was seen not as a collection of lives, but as a single heretical threat. More than 800 years have passed since that day. Béziers lives on as a modern town, but its medieval shadow stretches long. Its memory forces us to ask what it truly means for belief to justify destruction, and what can happen when fear and authority align to erase the distinction between foe and neighbor. What does the silence left behind by Béziers tell us about the cost of conviction and the fragile line between justice and devastation? For more history buried in the past, stay curious with the channel and continue exploring stories that were never meant to be forgotten.